Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Williams. I'm Adult and Community Services Manager with the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Happy National Library Week, everyone, for those who celebrate. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. It's a conversation with retired Boone County Judge Gary Oxenhandler about our judicial system. And today's Lunch and Learn is co-sponsored by the library and the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County. We're eternally grateful for this partnership. We have people attending both in person and we have folks on Zoom. So during the question and answer portion of the event, if you're on Zoom, please use the chat feature. We ask you to use the drop-down menu in chat and select to send your question to everyone so everyone can see what questions have been asked. And then when it's time for those in the room to ask questions, I'll be walking around with this microphone so that our folks on Zoom can hear those questions as well. We are recording this presentation and it will be available the next day or two on both the League's YouTube channel and the library's YouTube channel for future viewing. And I'll turn things over to League of Women Voters, Barbara Hoppy.
Thank you, Lauren, yes, and thank you to the Columbia Public Library for co-sponsoring the Lunch and Learn program every month. I'm really pleased today to have retired Judge Gary Oxenhandler here to answer questions and give you sort of an insight and perspective on the judicial system, both locally, statewide, and nationally. Hopefully just some of his opinions, strong opinions, weak opinions. But before I do that, I wanted to remind people that this Saturday, we have a special event, an afternoon with Luella, and it's at the Jane Froman Room at Columbia College in the Dorsey building. And it's with Elizabeth Palmieri, who has written a play about Luella St. Clair Moss in collaboration with the League of Women Voters and Columbia College. And that will be at 2 o'clock. Yes?
Sunday.
Sunday. Did I say Saturday? Oh, yeah. Sunday. Thank you. Sunday. And you can get tickets online. You can go to our website, the League of Women Voters, and find out how to get tickets. We have brochures at the back of the room for getting tickets too. And then following that, the week of April 17th through 19th, there will be a play for performances in the Dorsey Chapel, which is a gorgeous chapel in Columbia College. So please help. We're raising funds with the afternoon with Luella to help pay for the writing of the play, and then the play will be performed, and there'll be elegant setup with refreshments and special speakers in addition to Luella there as Elizabeth Palmieri, or is Elizabeth Palmieri as Luella. Okay. So with that, I just want to start with a brief introduction to retired Judge. I don't know if I need to say retired all the time.
Whatever Barbara wants to do, it's just fine with me. And it can be Gary.
Gary, yeah, retired Judge Gary Oxenhandler. Just a little introduction, and then I know Gary has a little story he'd like to tell, and then we'll get into the questions. We have some questions from the league, and then we'll have time, about 20 minutes at the end, 15, 20 minutes at the end for audience questions also. So in 2002, Gary Oxenhandler was appointed by Governor Bob Holden as circuit judge to replace retiring Judge Frank Conley. Then he was reelected in 2004 and 2010 and became presiding judge when Gene Hamilton retired on September 30th, 2010. And he served as presiding judge until 2013, and then retired in April of 2016, once you reach the mandatory age, which I won't say what that.
I like to say I was pasteurized.
But before becoming Boone County Judge, Gary Oxenhandler practiced law in mid-Missouri for 29 years. He went to the University of Missouri and received both his undergraduate degree and his law degree here. And he grew up in the St. Louis area. I don't know if it was a suburb of that.
U-City.
U-City, yes, right. So with that, I'll let Gary say a few introductory remarks and then we'll get to questions.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be in the library. I was just saying that Libby plays a big part in my life. I got a lot of books through Libby, and the League is one of my favorite organizations. A quick story, last week, presiding judge Josh Devine sought to impanel a grand jury. Janet, my bride, was called, and though confident that she would never be chosen, she was very excited just to get the notice. As an aside, Janet loves court TV, and she still hopes that the Menendez brothers will be released from prison and hopefully come live in Columbia, Missouri. Me, not so much. As anticipated, she was not selected. In his closing remarks, Judge Devine thanked everyone for their long mourning. He turned to Janet, who he called juror number 16, and he said, "It must have been very disconcerting for you to have to spend the morning with a portrait of me hanging just behind you as you sat in the jury box." And everyone laughed, and Janet, without missing a beat, said, "Your Honor, it didn't bother me at all. For the past 56 years, he's been peering over my shoulder." And I know that she's listening, and I didn't give her a heads up on that story. Barbara, I'm ready for whatever questions you have. And let me just make a comment. The door is open to questions. It doesn't matter what you want to ask. We'll try and field it, and I'll try and give you a good response and give you whatever insight I bring to the table.
So the first question is, what were the key factors and experiences that led you to become a lawyer and then judge? Or so what led you to be who you are, who you were?
You know, I think I are who I grew up, and that is, I grew up in U City. My folks owned a small pawn shop in St. Louis. My older brother and younger brother and I, we worked there from the very youngest of age. My folks, Bert and Lou, the name of the shop was B&L Pawn Shop. And we didn't have a lot, but we always had enough. And that I graduated U City High School in '64, came down here in '65 and met Janet on her first day of school. And graduated undergraduate school with a degree in English in '68, started law school in '68, got drafted on March 14th, 1969, spent 21 months, 16 days, and a few hours in the Army. And Janet got drafted along with me because we were at Fort Leonard Wood and she was teaching there. She was making $5,700 a year. I was making $135 a month, and she was saving money. I don't know how that happened, but it did happen. I got out of the Army and was back in law school and graduated in '73. Practiced for 29 years with my best friend from fourth grade, Marvin Toffel, who's here in town. And I know that Ruth is part of the League of Women Voters. And hopefully, Ruth, hi, you sent me a note. And practice was great. And at the end of that 29 years, which took me up just to about 2000, my son graduated, Josh, from law school. And I had a chance to practice with him. And that's the best thing that can happen to any parent when you get to hang out with your kid. And then it was really a series of bizarre events. There were no lawyers in my family, and it was really a lark of me going to law school. At that time, back in '68 and '69, the draft was something to worry about. If you were a doc or you were in the ministry, you got an extra years of deferment. But in U City, Ladue, and Clayton, the area, my board that I grew up in, you got your 4 years and then you were drafted. Marvin was going to law school and I just followed him in. And back then, it was easy to get in law school and they did everything they could to kick you out. Now it's very hard to get in law school and they do everything they can to keep you in. And I guess both philosophies, they both worked out for me. I was involved in a lot of interesting civil rights cases during the course of my practice. I was toward the end of practicing. I was outhouse counsel as an in-house attorney for a lot of companies around town. And it was just a turn of events. Gene Hamilton they thought he was going to go to the Court of Appeals, which meant there was going to be a slot open for a judge. And 2 lawyers came to me in town, Milt Harper and Big Bill Powell. And Powell and I were friends. Harper and I were not friends. We had been involved in a case 25 years before, and I don't think we ever recovered from it. But they called me up and said, "Hey, we want to talk to you." And I went to Bill Powell's office, and they said, "Look, Hamilton's going to the Court of Appeals. And we want to support someone as a judge who hasn't lived off the public trough, who's been in private practice, who knows what it's like to stay up all night long preparing for a trial and then not have your client show up. And so I talked to Janet and I talked to Marvin and I talked to Josh, and they said, go for it. And I threw my hat in the ring. Hamilton didn't go to the Court of Appeals. A year and a half later, Frank Conley retired. It repeated itself. I ended up on a panel before Governor Holy. And it was with Skip Walter, who later became president of the Missouri Bar Association, and Debbie Daniels, my dear buddy, smartest lawyer I ever met, who later joined me on the bench. And it just was, I remember going and talking to Bruce Wilson, because I didn't know what I was doing. And I went and talked to Bruce and I said, hey, Bruce, what do I do? And he said, how much have you given to the governor's campaign? Sure. And I said, well, I've never given anything to the governor's campaign. And he said, Gary, this will be a good learning experience. So I ended up on a panel, and 3 days later, the governor called and said, Gary, I'd like you to be the judge. And after that, it just was a rocket ship, writing 1,000 letters to clients, moving into a new place that I never really got up to go to on the second floor of the courthouse. Serving as presiding judge was a great honor. Got to serve with just great judges. It was, and when we have such a wonderful judiciary here in the 13th Judicial Circuit, it's something really to be proud of. And I will tell you this, there was a point when I was on the bench that of our 12 judges and commissioners, 9 were women. And that's just unheard of. And we're just celebrating 4 women on the Supreme Court, and there's just been a documentary made about it. I just was talking with my dear buddy Judge Ann Covington the other day, and that's going to hit the airwaves pretty soon, and it's supposed to be wonderful, and you should all see it. So everything that happened in my life that got me to this particular point was as happenstance as anybody else's. It just was a lark. I love being on the bench. We have mandatory retirement for judges at age 70. So April 21 was my birthday. On the 20th, I left the bench. And transition is sometimes difficult for judges. They don't want to leave the bench. And, you know, I worked my whole life and the transition was easy for me. I mediate, I arbitrate, I'm finishing up a book, and I get to speak at events like this, which is totally enjoyable. And I'll shut up. And Barbara, yes.
I'll start with a local question. So what type of cases did you preside over as judge? And what other duties did you have as a presiding judge, just for our audience to get a sense of that?
Well, I was a judge, Article 5 judge of general jurisdiction, a circuit judge, so I could hear any kind of case. I heard any kind of civil case, any kind of criminal case, tried about 250 jury trials, any kind of personal injury, medical malpractice, products liability, all the way up through capital murder. Got to sit with the Supreme Court a couple of times. I was, 20 miles away, and sometimes they needed a bookmark judge. And so I'd hustle up to Jefferson City, and that was a great honor. As a presiding judge, you're in charge of everything. And really, it's surprising. You're a circuit judge, and you think you're busy, and then you become presiding judge, and you're doing what you did before, and you're also spending 20 to 25 hours a week dealing with a herd of cats that you're dealing with. Because really, in terms of independence, judges tend to be independent, and you can tell them to do something or ask them to do something or pray that they'll do something, and it's 50-50 whether it will ever occur or even will sound like they responded to your question. So you run the budget, you're administratively in charge, you assign all the judges to all their cases. One of the things that we did is when I came on the bench, it was interesting, there was a complete shift of power because Gene Hamilton left. And at the time that right before that, it was Gene Hamilton, Frank Conley, and Ellen Roper. And really, Ellen was the minority voter there. Hamilton and Conley sort of led the ship. And that when I came on the bench, well, Ellen and I were trial practice partners in law school. The power shifted. And one of the things that we did is that we changed assignment of cases. before the presiding judge would go, okay, I think Barb should try this one. Or, wow, this is interesting, I'll try this one. Well, we turned it to a random system, which I think is part and parcel of due process. You should be shooting craps as to the judge you get. You can get rid of a judge under certain circumstances, but I felt that that was a big change, an important change that took place.
Yes, definitely. So, next question, I do have a due process question, so I might just go to that one and then go back to the others. What is due process and why is it important and crucial to our democracy?
Well, simply, it is notice, the right to be heard, and the right to be heard by an impartial tribunal or judge. And it's the essence of what we do. And I recall when I first went on the bench, Gene Hamilton was my mentor, and I went in and go, what do we do here? What's the key? And he said, give them a hearing. Whatever it is, give them a hearing. And that's what I did. I had a very low threshold. If someone wanted to be heard on something, I listened to them. And so the strong part of due process, I think, is what happens in the courtroom, where hopefully our judges treat people respectfully and they listen to them, and then we try and judge impartially. And that's a tough thing. We are all marked with how we grew up and what's important to us. And you need to be able to set that aside. And then you need to be ready to read about yourself in the newspaper, what an idiot you are. And there were certainly a lot of judges that lived under the shadow of the Court of Appeals. Wow, if I do this, the Court of Appeals, I might get flipped, or I might, and I wasn't like that. Not that I didn't care about what the Court of Appeals did with my case. I tried to make my decisions based on the evidence that was presented to me and the law that was presented to me by counsel. I always thought the most enjoyable part of the courtroom was having good lawyers argue their cases. And oftentimes on Monday, we had law days and they were very, very busy. It was not unusual to have 100 cases on Monday, but someone would come in with a significant argument and I'd say, hey, look, I got 20 other cases to hear. How about coming back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock? It'll be only us in the courtroom and I can ask you questions and you can tell me what you think. And oftentimes, because I was the judge, I could say, well, what about this? And they'd say, Judge, I'm going to get to that in a minute. And I would be able to say, no, let's get to it now. My brain works differently than your brain, and I've got this void that I need to fill in right now so that I can understand your arguments. So that was really one of the best parts. And interacting with juries was a lot of fun too.
Great. Yeah, that was a question. So let's see. I guess the question was, what did you enjoy most and what you least about being a judge? So I guess you told us a little bit about the most. What about the least?
Newspapers didn't bother me. Decisions of the Court of Appeals didn't bother me. I think sometimes you have to make, and particularly in the criminal arena, people come before you and they're floundering in their lives. And you try and come up with a meaningful decision that you hope will get them down the road. Maybe I'll share a little story.
Yeah.
Janet and I built a new home 6 years ago, and the general contractor, he pretty much picked all the subcontractors, but we got down to the end. We were probably within a month of getting into the home, and I got a call that the painter wanted to meet me to pick out the textures. So I go to the house, and it's filled up with artisans, cabinet makers, carpet layers, tile, everybody's there. And when I walk in the room, into the living room, everybody leaves. I go, this is telling. And the painter's there. And I walk up to him and I stick out my hand. I say, hi, I'm Gary Oxenhandler. He says, I know who you are. You were the judge in my case. And the only thing that I can think is, what is he going to do to the paint? Now let you conjure up what that might be. And he said, and you sent me to prison. He said, but you put me in a program and it really helped me. And I got out in 120 days and I got my life together. And I put this whole company together here. And I thank you so much for that. And we hugged and everybody came back into. So, it's those ending things that you don't realize happened. Yesterday, was an astounding day. A man delivered something to the house, and I walked out the front door to get it from him. And he said, "You're Judge Oxenhandler." I said, "Well, I used to be Judge Oxenhandler. Now I'm just a powerless old man." And he said, "Well, you were the judge in a case that I had 15 years ago." And he said, I never had a chance to tell you this. You were great. You were very attentive to me, and it worked out well." And he starts crying, and I start crying. And those are the kind of things that make it all, where you hear a story, you don't usually get it like that. You usually hear it in terms of the role that I played many years later. You hear something about it, or you get a note that has meaning to you. And I hope that all of the judges have an opportunity to have that experience. We all have it in our lives. We help someone we throw a shower for someone 40 years ago and we hear about it. I just had a conversation a minute ago about that. And we plant a seed, it works out, and maybe we get some feedback, and isn't that wonderful? And I have another great story, which maybe I'll share, so you can ask me questions. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, then we'll get to that story, but what you're saying is really important, is that the most important thing is how you affect people's lives and how you hear about it, and how you don't hear about it, but it happens. Yeah, hopefully for the positive.
Hopefully for that. But there's things don't work out. I mean, whether we're dealing with defendants in a courtroom or our own children, we want them to do this, or we hope from that. We can't control all of that. Everybody has their own path, and how we intersect with it. That's sort of the name of the game.
So a different question, completely different, is can you compare what it was like to be a judge before and after social media?
Well, yes and no. First of all, I'm not on social media. And it's sort of another interesting story. When I first went on the bench, judges annually go to Judges College, Judicial College. It's a week-long college. It's in the summer, half the judges go and the other half go in the fall. And that I think that when I first went on the bench, we also went to rookie school for a week. And they said, learn here's what a road looks like. You zip it up, those kind of things. But one of the things they said is, look, and we really were just breaking the ground on social media back in 2002. But they said, look, don't get a license plate that says judge on the back. Don't put your name on the mailbox. And you need to think about taking your name out of the phone book. Well, I went home and shared all these things with Jan, and she was like, what? And I said, look, come to one of my law days and sit in the courtroom. So she did. And I had about, 25 or 30 defendants that were in jail at the time. And they appeared before me one at a time, handcuffed, maybe shackled, in their orange outfits. And when I got home, she said, I'm thinking about going back to my maiden name. And so, we didn't have social media, but I've never been on social media. And I still, I didn't want that feedback. And also, as a judge, I never wanted anyone to know where I was. And when I go into a restaurant, I still try and find a seat with my back to the wall. And there have been circumstances where I've had threats made against me and they changed the course of my life. And we can talk about those things too, but it is I don't know. It is very possible that if you're a county commissioner, you get more negative letters than you do if you're a judge. People more afraid of me, so.
Well, thank you. Another question, we'll sort of jump to more of the national scene, in the national judiciary. Let's see, what is the role and importance of judges in our constitutional form of government, and in the importance of the balance of power between executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government? That's a very current issue.
It is a very current issue, as you know. It's been running around in my head for the past couple
Right,
of weeks.
and maybe a second question you can combine with that was asking you about your letter to the editor in the Missourian. That probably goes with that.
The branches of government, executive, legislative, and judicial, we're equal. We all play our roles. And it really, the answer is in the question that you asked. It's a balance of power. We're checks and balances on one another, and we have to have respect for one another. I don't think that it's more complicated than that, Barbara. To me, it just is, I look to the legislature, they may pass a rule of law which I may or may not care for. It may be that I'm called upon to judge the constitutionality or the applicability or the artfulness in which it was drawn, but nonetheless, it's the law and I'm supposed to abide by it. And so that's the role of the two. And the executive branch is sort of, once again, is an independent branch and acts of itself and is supposed to take directive from our directions from both the court and the legislature. So it is, the very essence of it is we're co-equal and we should all treat each other with respect, which is your second
Right,
question.
right.
Much to Janet's chagrin, I wrote a letter to the editor. And the letter to the editor now, it's around the state now. By the end of the week, it will, today I'm a guest commentary in the Star. It'll be in the Post-Dispatch on Friday. It's been in the Missourian and it's been in the Springfield News Leader.
Huh?
And I don't know who else is picking it up. And basically, I worked on and it's interesting. And do you think I could just share it? It's 249 words
yeah,
long.
sure.
Is that all right? It's not long.
Please do.
And I'd rather, I can't do it the way that I did it. So just go with me for this. All the headlines seem to read that our president is taking on the judges. It appears this means that he's targeting those judges that made rulings adverse to his interest points of view. For 13 years, I served as a Missouri Circuit Judge. My rulings required the reading and understanding of judicial opinions written by judges across the country. Though sometimes I didn't agree with the ruling, I always believed the deciding judge was doing their best to be fair and impartial. That's the way it's supposed to be. And if a party was unhappy with a ruling, they could appeal. That's how the system works. No one should target anyone, let alone our judges. Our country requires a strong judiciary, one that's not subject to the whims of the co-equal executive and legislative branches. Wherever one might fall in the political spectrum, no one should be allowed to mess with our judiciary, as it's been our judges who have always protected all of us. Lefties, righties, abolitionists of all shapes and sizes, the disabled, the educated, the not so educated, the reds and the blues, the rich and the poor, all of us. Now's the time to step up and be heard. That stepping up needs to include our almost 500 retired Missouri judges. Let's all, everyone, talk to our friends and legislators, hands off our judges. This is so important. It's what our nation is all about.
Goes the balance of power.
And it goes to the balance of power. And it's just that, just go with the rulings, appeal if you don't like something. That's what we can do. And even if it gets to a court where we think, well, there's imbalance in that court, that's the way the court is, and that's how it goes. And that's all about the rule of law and due process and the equal balance.
Thank you. So following that, getting back to Missouri and the state of Missouri, if you could briefly describe how judges are selected in Missouri, the important Missouri system, and how that's a model for other states. And the second question is, what can we do to make sure that that continues in Missouri? It's the Missouri system.
Missouri plan. I think 1940, Tom Pendergast, the mob boss in Kansas City, the election of judges was completely political. He controlled the judiciary. Missouri somehow decided to do something about it, and we passed the Missouri Nonpartisan Court Plan. The Missouri Nonpartisan Court Plan has now been adopted. Originally, it was by 38 states, but now they're saying it's 30 states. And it's become a model for everybody else. And interestingly, in Boone County, we don't really follow the Missouri Court Plan. The Missouri Court Plan is utilized in our major cities, St. Louis, Kansas City, Springfield. Boone County is right on the cusp. Someday we may be part of the plan. We have to opt into it. But basically, there are commissions that put together, people apply, they break it down to 3 judges to recommend to the governor makes a decision. It's endeavored to be nonpartisan. The idea of it is, if you live in Livingston County and there's 12,000 people there, they're gonna know the judges. But in St. Louis or Kansas City or Springfield, where there's 1 million people, you can't know everybody. And it just makes it a little fair. So whether we ever go to a plan like that in Boone County, I don't know. It's been a discussion that is going on. And in terms of how we continue it, I don't know that there's any pushback to it right now. I think everybody grouses that if you have a Republican or a Democratic, I'll use myself as an example. Walther, Oxenhandler, and Daniels, we were sent up there as a panel, but it was a Democratic governor. And there was not going to be a Republican appointed here in Boone County. And so that's a mark against it. You go, well, but we changed in most states, in many states, we change who our leadership is. And it may take place over a longer period of time. I personally am waiting for the pendulum to swing in Missouri. I don't know, I just got my 10-year tetanus shot. I don't know I'm gonna need another one. And so I'm not sure whether I'm gonna see the pendulum swing back the other way. But I will tell you this, when I look, even if we look at the US Supreme Court, Chief Judge Roberts just made a decision that sort of flew in the face of many believers of one political party, And so hopefully the essence of it is that when you become a judge, you set aside all those things. And I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a libertarian, I'm not a Republican, I'm a circuit judge, and that's what I do.
Thank you. So, getting to judges again and ethical rules, what are the most important ethical rules for judges locally, state, and nationally, or federally, if there are any? And what is your opinion about that?
Well, there's a whole body, as a judge, we're lawyers and we're judges. So we're subject to the Chief Disciplinary Counsel of the state who deals with lawyers. And then there's a committee on retirement and discipline of judges. It's a longer name than that, and I've never committed it to memory. And that, we can't be partisan. We have to really keep our heads down. We can't go out and support people as judges. We have to keep our mouths shut. We have to keep our mouths shut and our heads down. And numerous times while I was on the bench, counsel might be involved in something that would be called into question, and I would become a reporter. I would have to call disciplinary counsel and say, this is happening, and write a letter. And one of the questions they always ask me is, do you want to be in the loop on this? And my answer was, no, I don't want to be on the loop. Because while this goes on, this attorney he or she may appear before me, and I don't want to know anything that might be going on with a particular matters. And I just think that I'm trying to think of things that you hear about. It's usually judges stepping outside their bounds, getting involved in some activity that they should not be involved in, that calls them into their propriety into question. But nothing really pops into my mind right now. We mostly read about them in the paper and go, why would you open your mouth? Why would you do that? Mostly judges shouldn't be talking about generally their cases while they're involved in it. There's no good that will become of that. And a really good story. Can I tell a good story? Sure. I was a lady, and I'm sorry, her name evades me right now, but she was arrested for trespassing at Planned Parenthood. And that the city came in, and when the morning of the trial, I look out in the audience, and a lawyer in Kansas City who I know really well, I went to kindergarten with, is sitting there, and I go, Doug Gertner. I go, Mr. Gertner, come up here. And he approaches the guy, what are you doing here? He says, well, I represent Planned Parenthood nationally. And I go, he said, but I'm not involved in this case. I'm just here to observe. I go, step back. And I say to everybody, the lawyers are all there, and I go, you all just saw Mr. Gertner come up here, and you know who he is. And he's been a friend of mine for 50 years. And anybody wants me out of this case, I'm out of it. And they go, no, Judge, we're happy. We want you to try the case, which I do. And so I try the case, and the city makes an egregious error. They fail to put on a piece of evidence that they need to put on. And as a result of that, right after their case, I direct a verdict in favor of the defendant. And that, so the story ends, we're down the road 3 months later. Judge Azel, Jody Azel, who's circuit judge at the time, is also on the bench with me. She comes into my office and she says, well, I guess you saw a big write-up about you in Missouri Catholic Magazine. And I said, no, I don't subscribe. And she says, and I look at it, and it's an article about the case, and it's just lauding what a great judge I am. And really, there would have probably been nothing more that I would rather do than fine this lady, fine her $10 for trespassing on Planned Parenthood. And so in any event, it's a nice article lauding me. And I tell the story when I retire. I have a state of the retiring judge to all the Boone and Callaway County lawyers. And I tell the story and I say, I think that it may have been the first time that a Jew got a major write-up, which they all thought. And then I said, no, actually it was the second one, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
That one was a rolling laughter, which I won't explain.
You don't need that. So you're speaking to being fair and impartial despite your personal beliefs.
And that's the essence of it. And that's what I saw judges do time and time again. Because we weren't a politically homogenous bench at the, of our 12 judges and commissioners, there were several that felt different ways about different things. And but I always felt that everybody was trying their best to be fair and impartial. And if they felt, and that not only goes to how I might feel, but it also goes to the participants and how they feel when I had that case that I just talked about. And if anybody had said, Judge, we want you off the case, it would have been fine. That's just the nature of the game. Some cases you hear, some cases you don't hear.
Thank you. A couple more questions and we'll get to audience questions.
Sure. And I'll cut back on the stories. But I think that sometimes the stories tell more than the story themselves.
Great. Yeah, they're very elucidating, I guess is the word. So incarcerated Missourians, their loved ones, and prison staff gathered at the Capitol, Missouri Capitol last Wednesday to advocate for an independent prison oversight. What are your thoughts and opinions on this? And can you talk a little bit about also capital punishment, the death penalty, and overcrowding in the jails? So something, please.
My God, that's the biggest question I've ever been asked. Well,
the jail question.
Let me start with the jail question. One of my areas of interest for the past, since the late 70s, has been jail populations on a local, state, and national level. And that I'm still continue to be involved in those questions in various places. And that I've served on and chaired a number of commissions for the county looking at jail populations. And the week before Barbara contacted me and said, would you consider doing a Q&A? There was an article on the front page of the Missourian that there was overcrowding at the jail. And to me, it's an interesting balance. Is it an overcrowding problem or is it a mass incarceration problem?
Yeah.
And that interestingly, there is a report that comes out once a week, which you probably could get on the mailing list for, that tells all the details about what's going on in the jail in terms of their populations and dispositions and things like that for the past week. And it's a snapshot of the day. And there's only the names and all that information means nothing to me. But on page 8, there's a footnote. And in the footnote, it says, today it costs X amount to incarcerate defendants out of county. And that I know that the budget for the county, unless it's changed very recently, is $300,000, which means that we can spend $821 a day and be within budget. Last Thursday, that number was $5,373, which means that if that projected out over a year, which it won't, it'll go up and down, though it's sustaining at that number for the past month, we'd be $1.5 million over budget. So, okay, we house people out of county. Is that a bad thing? No, it's really not. The reason is that if we were to go and say, well, let's build a bigger jail, and just like Field of Dreams, if we build it, they will come, which, because it lowers the threshold for putting people in jail. It could cost us anywhere from $60 to $100 million to build a facility. In addition to that, we can't get the staff to operate it because it's not a fun job working in a jail. It's not fun working in a place where people might spit on it. And so we don't have long-term jailers. And we actually have an experience here in Boone County while I was on the bench where we had to shut down a pod of 40 inmates. And they had to be housed out of county. And we really looked at this issue back then about staffing. So there is this balance. Us paying $1.5 million a year, is that a better deal than spending $100 million on a facility that we can't staff? And that has nothing to do with what it costs to operate the facility. And so they project out it could cost $200,000 a bed to build a facility. That's sort of a round number that's used, though we could, what if it's $100,000? Still, we're talking $40 million to build a 400-person facility. So also another problem that has grown in the early 90s, we started shutting down our mental institutions. And as a result of that, we created a street problem. And then we had Afghanistan, and we have lots of people coming back from the military that are living on the streets. And we have the unhoused problem that we're dealing with. And a lot of those end up in jail facilities. And so one of the things that we did that actually Gene Hamilton did, based on a committee that took place for the county right at the time I came on the bench, and that was he created the Jail Administration Committee, which meets weekly. And the idea, it sort of stalled over COVID because they're not effective if they're Zoom. They're just not as effective. But you got everybody in a room who had anything to do with putting people in jail. The judges, the prosecutors, probation and parole, the court services officers, anybody, public defender, anybody that the bonds people were all involved in it. And what happened is we talked about jail populations, and the sheriff may say, well, if you could, on Monday, if you would do your docket in the morning, people who had to go to prison, we could take them in the afternoon and we wouldn't hold them overnight and we wouldn't incur those dollars. Well, that was easy enough to do. So not only were there discussions taking place, but the mini discussions, MINI discussions, that took place after a meeting between people going, hey, well, could we do this or what about that? So that's being re-energized, I understand. And we're trying to take a look at that. Now, that was sort of my mass incarceration, overcrowding. It's not an easy answer. It's not an easy answer. And we're pretty sophisticated in the 13th Judicial Circuit. Dwayne Carey does a hell of a job of running his jail out there, but it's an insurmountable problem. It's a cluster. But I personally at this point, and I would mention this, in 2001, I chaired a commission for the county looking at the jail population, and they brought in a consultant, and the consultant said, you need to build a bigger jail. And we resisted it. And it's now 2025, and we haven't expanded the jail. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't need to be expanded, but as a result of innovative thinking, we've gotten around that problem for all these years. We need to keep thinking outside the box to preserve our own capital assets here in the 13th Judicial Circuit, Boone County. But there's not a good answer. I just look at it and go, the article in the newspaper circling back said, overcrowding. And it didn't say a thing about mass incarceration. And I wanted to write a letter to the editor for that, but I didn't. And say, you missed the point here. It's really this balance that's taking place. And how do we figure it out? I don't know.
Could talk to the writer. Maybe he could do a follow-up article. Just a suggestion. But last question before we get to
Sure.
Public or audience questions. You mentioned to me that you wrote a book recently, A Life of Murder. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's just it's getting ready to be printed. It's called The Life of a Murder. It is about, some of you might remember it. Back in 1976, a lady by the name of Rebecca Doisy was a student at the university, and she worked at Ernest. And on August 5th, 1976, she disappeared. And they had a pretty good idea that it was this guy by the name of Johnny Wright who did it, but they couldn't turn the evidence on him. And then he disappeared. And then in 1985, 9 years later, a guy got busted in St. Louis and said, let's make a deal. I know something about the disappearance and murder of a woman in Columbia. Joe Mosley was the prosecutor. Chris Egbert, who is a former detective for CPD, got together and they ultimately issued a warrant for Johnny Wright's arrest in November of 1985. 24 years later, he was arrested in Lawrenceville, Georgia, 2009. I tried the case, presided over the case in 2011. The body was never found. I became interested in the case. Don't know what it was, just interested. Interviewed a lot of witnesses, got a lot of materials. And one of the people that I interviewed was a boyfriend that she had back in the early 70s that stayed friends with the family. And I interviewed him, he said, you know, you're just like every other guy. You've fallen in love with Becky Doisy. And, you know, and I can't tell, but she was a very lovely woman and she didn't deserve to die. And it's been a 3-year experience. We're just right at finished the design work, and maybe in the next couple of weeks we'll go to printer. So it's been a really fun experience. It'll be nice. It'll be nice to get through it. I've been working on it for 3 years while I mediate, while I arbitrate. And I don't know that it's an experience I want to have again.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. So now we have 2 questions from the Zoom audience. I guess we can take those and then, or we can go to this audience and then mix these up. Why don't we do that? The live audience.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on restorative justice.
Okay. You know, I have mixed emotions about it. There have been circumstances where I thought getting the people together might be helpful. And then in other circumstances, it wouldn't work. I mentioned to you that I mediate. One of the new topics that I've been studying is mediation in criminal law cases, which is brand new, and people are wrestling with that exact problem. And that, you know, we start to deal with restorative justice when we have a criminal case because of the development of the victims' rights laws that we have created, which allows victims to be involved in every phase of the trial, at least having knowledge. And certainly when it comes down to criminal sentencing, I've often had victims or victims' family testify as to sentencing. And sometimes I think it is cathartic for them to do that. And sometimes I think they're still burdened by this and they will be burdened by this forever, regardless of how responsive the court might be. And the essence of restorative justice is really trying to bring the parties together to try to psychologically allow people to get better from the trauma that they suffered. So, you know, I think that it works in some instances, and that a lot of times, you know, it may be important for someone who's been in prison for a while to write a letter to the victim or the victim's family, and it helps them work through it. But I think it's case by case. I don't think we can shove it down anyone's throat. And I think also it can be hurtful. And I'm really anxious about that. You know, I'll run into someone who was a victim 15 years later and they're still a victim and it was too much of an event, too traumatic of an event to really work through.
I'm interested in your ideas and opinions about cash bail and how that contributes to the number of people who are in jail awaiting trial.
Okay, bail is really complicated. I sat on a Missouri Supreme Court commission on criminal justice. And in fact, I now co-chair for the Missouri Supreme Court's Commission on Racial and Ethnic Fairness, a criminal justice committee. And I think that sometimes you need a cash bond. I will tell you, I succumb to it. I will tell you that the longer I practice, the longer I was on the bench, the less amount that I used it. Here's the concern of judges, real simple. You have someone that comes before them for a low-level case, and you put them on probation, and 2 months later, they drive drunk and they kill somebody. And the reaction is, if you'd have put that person in jail, someone would be alive right now. And it's a thing that judges wrestle with, that we have to try and put aside when we endeavor to make a good decision with regard to bail and bonds. And I think that the bond system, it's such a powerful lobby, we can't put it to sleep. And I think if it fell more on the judges, that there would be less people incarcerated. And I regularly talk to our judges about the jail population, and really goes back to that question. That's what's filled up. Now, I will tell you this, early 90s, Boone County Jail, 75%, this is a rough number that I'm remembering, were people serving misdemeanor offenses. Now, it's probably under 3%. And the exception to those rules are those with mental health problems, where you have someone where they were in some kind of a low-level assault, but they're not capable of not reassaulting. And so they end up, and that's the other end of this continuum. We don't have it. And right now, it's months and months before you can get a mental health evaluation for a defendant. And it's months and months before you can get a bed. Now, it's interesting because this case just popped up. In 2012, I had a case where we had somebody sitting in jail and they needed a bed. And the Department of Mental Health said, we don't have any space. And on my own, I sought to hold the Department of Mental Health in contempt, and the case went away. They found a bed. And somehow, I don't know how they did. Now, that was maybe a simplistic answer when the problem isn't as great as it is now. It's a real problem. We have huge numbers of people that have mental health problems that are in our jails, and we can't get them out, and they'll reoffend immediately, and they might put other people at risk.
I'm wondering about the ramifications of the Supreme Court decision. Did Trump win or did immigrants win? I just want hard time to tell.
I don't think that we know who wins.
Okay.
It's just like, I don't know what, I go to a lot of sources. My news sources are many, and pretty much when I look at all of them, I go, oh, there's a topic that's being discussed. But I never know what the topic is unless you endeavor to go and do a deep dive. And then even when you do a deep dive, you really would almost have to go read the Supreme Court decisions and decide what impact they were going to have. And we don't know day to day what's going on because the executive rules change on a daily basis. So I don't know the answer as to who's winning or losing. My grandparents came to this country. Most of our grandparents came to this country. And I go, other people should come to this country. I don't get it. I think we have to exercise control over it, but to shut our doors, we don't want this kind of people or that kind of people to be here. Really, we were all kind of people. In answer to your question, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart.
So a follow-up question that we got on Zoom is, what rights under our Constitution do immigrants who are in the U.S. have, and legal and illegal immigrants, and is due process one of those rights?
And did you say legal or illegal?
Both.
Oh, both. Okay. It goes back to our first discussion about the rule of the law, the opportunity to have notice and have a hearing and have it be decided by an impartial tribunal. Certainly, if people are in our country and they are not here by lawful means, that their due process of rights shrink up. And it's driven by what they did, how they avoided the laws in coming into the United States as to how they might be expelled. mean, we like to think that they're gonna have an opportunity to be heard by someone, but it's a huge scale.
But to be heard on whether you are legal or illegal is a due process, right? Right.
Well, it is a due process right that some would argue is not protected by the Constitution. It's administrative. You know, it's just not, it's not simple. And also, when you have an organization that is taking to action on a large scale, it's hard to protect those little people.
Lots of important questions. We have enough for, do we have time for one more question? I'm not sure. Do we? And then a wrap up, yeah.
Got a question
What?
there? Make it an easy one, because it's the last question.
Do you see a relationship between recidivism and rights restoration, particularly voting rights restoration?
Well, we know that we have a recidivism problem. And we pretty much track those closely for people that we put out on probation and how often they return. And it's a pretty big number that people. Now, we also know, for example, as people age, they're less likely to reoffend, driven by the nature of the offense. And, you know, I don't know that I see the link that you've asked about. I don't know that I know enough. And this was supposed to be an easy question. This is unfair. I don't know the answer to your question. I would simply say that. I'm sorry.
That's a fair answer, I think. Thank you so much, Gary, for coming and sharing your experience, your insight, your knowledge with us. I really appreciate the time. It was also entertaining as well as thoughtful. So let's give them.
It's my honor. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
And before we end, I just want to say the next Lunch and Learn is May 14th, and it will be with our new, let's see, the new Office of Violence Prevention person who I forget the name of, but he will be here. Is it DeMarcus Thompson? Yeah, Brown. Yeah, will be here speaking on violence prevention and what he will be doing as the administrator. And I also want to let people know that our annual meeting is April 16th at 6 p.m. So please come to that. And then also here in the library. And also again, remind people that we have that afternoon with Luella fundraiser at Columbia College this Saturday, and you can get tickets Sunday again. I keep saying online, and we have announcements in the back also. And then the play is the following week, April 17th through 19th. So this is a play that was custom done by Elizabeth Palmieri for Columbia, but hopefully it will go statewide and nationwide. It should be very excellent, entertaining. So thank you all for coming.